What's up, guys? Today is the 11th of March 2018, and I have a special guest, Nino Mew. Hi, Mew. She wants to be involved. One of those days where she wants to be up in my business, but I guess better her distracting me than some of the crap that I've been subjecting myself to. So in recent times, I've been, as I got kind of pissed about yesterday, which I actually don't have, active social media really anymore that I could, have a bitch fit about. I don't like to abuse Twitter like that, despite the fact that everybody else does. Because primarily I want people to be able to use that, and myself, to use that as an actual reference for records and important stuff that I'm sharing. Mew, you are so feisty today. Hi. So, she's doing me a favor because I've been looking for alternative social media sites or whatever to basically, find consensus or people who are interested in things I talk about my work. And that's definitely an extreme or polarizing thing because most people aren't into, actual academics or intellectual topics. But I haven't uploaded it, so I can't say that I can't directly reference it or whatever, paraphrase. But I recorded a video yesterday that I just apparently wasn't ready to upload or whatever. And primarily it was kind of a conclusive epiphany I was having with me having a lack of focus and practical direction with my work, and just coming to some honest realizations with, yes, I'm a homeopath, yes, I can fix my own personal crisis, medical and physiological issues, but the reason why I have to endure and fix those crises is because I am not the one that emulates and practices, a quote unquote healthy lifestyle kind of thing, and a balanced, more or less physical, mundane life, like my friend who's basically fighting the same kind of problem demons, more or less, for lack of a better term, on a physiological, nutritional, and physical health spectrum, with him founding the Public Health Coalition and being an advocate for keto, alternative diets, and standing up and voicing and advocating that the mainstream FDA food regulations, the consensus or pressure or just even systematic you can't say it any other way, but in slavery or imprisoning us to not have any other alternative choices for diet. Like, for one example, he said, take out all vegetable oils and processed sugars. And if you look, almost every single thing you buy anywhere, unless it's just strictly raw produce or raw meat, and even then we don't entirely know what is being infused with some of that, and the pesticides and et cetera, and the hormones. So we don't have actual choices for that unless you actually produce and provide your own food sustenance, and that goes back to kind of enslaving and eliminating the free will and freedom of choice. So that being said, this kind of stems down to something I was ranting about. I took myself's advice, and primarily because my phone was about to die, and I just had my quiet time or whatever, and I decided to go finish reading and taking some notes and highlighting the last of a couple books I had, and then I felt compelled to start writing out some things. So I have written Modern Psychology and Concepts of Mental Health. Behavioral theory, along with the vast spectrum of social sciences, is not only counterproductive to mental wellness, but is entirely destructive. As polarizing as that statement may sound, allow me to explain why I have reached such conclusions. Beyond the misconceptions of behavioral archetypes, misdiagnoses that lead to toxic medications that do nothing for the wrongfully diagnosed, but, by the way, also don't actually treat the presumed condition either, psychiatric drugs are not a cure nor a solution. It's a self-chemical induced prison. The psychoactive drugs only mask external behavior, while inducing crippling helplessness internally. Abnormal behaviors, just as physiological symptoms, are signals of internal dysfunction, a warning that something is wrong, whether that be from internal or external, mental or physical, or even sometimes spiritual in some cases. Mental health and diagnosis of modern day is systematic torture and abuse, condemnation under the guise of compassion and consideration. Mental health establishments, along with big pharma, pharmaceutical industries, the medical industry, and modern medicine in general, it operates with the motive of external consensus to heal or treat an individual. In many cases, the self develops their own coping mechanisms and has no desire for intervention, yet is subjected regardless due to the inconvenience of their behavior or external symptoms that are bothering other people. So it's usually, the people that are committing people to psychiatry, or, for myself, example, when I was, a teenager, I was being, kind of forced or, aggressively persuaded to pursue antidepressants. And that actually stems from something else in a book that I'll actually touch base on throughout this video too, which is funny. I've mentioned before, and I've, basically accepted and resolved internally the resentment or like the discontent I had with some of the relationship dynamic with my parents. But I used to emphasize to my father, who essentially when I was younger, I used to say he was the favorite parent, and primarily because he was the less proactive and involved parent. Because for some reason I preferred the notion of having an absent parent than having what my mother, quote unquote, was projecting her what she wanted me to be and what she thought I should be, and the particular things that bothered her. And that I felt was actually more damaging to my development and my stability as an individual, as an adult now, as opposed to not having one at all. But that's not always the case for some people. But so in many cases, the self develops their own coping mechanisms and has no desire for intervention, yet is subjected regardless to the inconvenience of their behavior and their external symptoms. Disorders and disease can be summed up as dysfunction or distress interfering with the person's everyday life and productivity, not the discontent, annoyance, disapproval, or interference of their behavior or the symptoms therein to others' productivity or their lives. If people have a problem, the world's big enough for, get to step in. Remove yourself from the situation if you have a problem. So, chaos deflected to external origins when it's all internal, problems, aka anything other than the self or the true origin, is a defense mechanism for blatant lack of self-accountability and responsibility. Let's take, for example, mental health and psychiatric academics, a vast majority of whom pursue psychiatry, are driven to the subject matter because they themselves have mental dysfunctions. I can also, vouch for that. That yes, primarily I was highly interested in it because I was aware that I was abnormal. And then I just actually have a fascination and a deep interest for people watching, Scorpio, Mercury, Creeper kind of stuff. And so I just developed a knack for it naturally. And where was I? Those who pursue psychiatry are driven to the subject matter because they themselves have mental dysfunctions. Some therapists become therapists, that are healing similar cases to plights of their own past struggles if they've gotten over it. But in reality, the majority, especially like people who work in social work and shit, use psychology in their expertise to perpetuate and continue the denial, never truly resolving their own inner demons and tainting those who are seeking to acknowledge and accept their own problems. As ranty as this has been, and I may have lost some of you, and granted I did a little bit quick revisions and scratched some stuff out, so it's not as ranty, but it seems more ranty when I'm reading. I'm reading it as opposed to, or when you're reading it as opposed to me actually speaking it aloud. So, as ranty as this has been, and I may have lost some of you, one major factor is entirely missing from this dynamic at present time. The self needs to heal the self. The patient, or prisoner in this case, as I would call it, did not seek help nor request healing. Many cases, those plagued with psychiatric problems fail to see the problem at all. Sometimes that's because of their, distorted view of reality, or, whatever. They have a Neptune, hard aspect or something. And mental stability, cognitive conditions, disorders are manifestations of primarily an internal struggle. In some cases, it's biochemical, which reverts back to the environmental factors poisoning or sabotaging biology, aka our diets and toxic things that are being perpetuated into our environment. Health and wellness needs to start from within, just as confidence, intelligence, purpose resonate from within. Health and wellness is not a level of quality of life. It's a long-term goal of the self, a consequence of the self-love, importance, value, and fulfillment of life. Treating mental dysfunction is not only counterproductive to self-fulfillment and wellness, but there is a fundamental lack going on. As a matter of fact, two principles that are echoed throughout human evolution. One is knowledge and its utmost valuable presence, and free will, or the freedom of choice, that comes second. Acceptance and understanding are the result from these principles. Those two concepts are responsible for all of humanity and higher consciousness progression and evolution. Those two very crucial things are what is entirely missing from modern day society, and the lack of these things is the origin of all secular society's problems, crises, and challenges. If collective people were educated on the dynamic of brain function, its inherited integration with all forms of life and consciousness, its importance, its development, how to empower it, and the benefits resulting in strengthening cognition and mental capacities, also recognizing, understanding harmful influences, effects, how to alleviate or rectify hazardous influences, accept their unique subjectivity of consciousness, loving and knowing themselves, health, wellness, and purpose are the consequences of doing those things. As you reflect back on what I have told you, remember, choice and knowledge cure all crisis. Everything else is a placebo. It's a pseudo-principle, premeditated facade, concocted to deceive the masses and simultaneously dehumanize us all, which will lead to our ultimate demise. The mind of man is unstable, unreliable, and inaccurate. That's defined in astrology as well, with all the facets of the mind representing the mutable planets and the mutable actual archetypes. It is entirely flawed, thereby making man flawed, because ment is the origin of all things. Laws, altruistic principles, and mantras are emphasized not only as ultimate rules or enforced norms to obey, but as a constant standard for humanity to gauge and guide their lives. Altruistic or natural laws are absolute and mirror all forms of organic life and existence, thereby universal and not limited to moral duality and subjectivity of good and evil, right or wrong, or just and not. When humanity forgets natural law, disregards its timeless principles, personified in religious and philosophical doctrine, humanity loses itself to chaos, caused by the yin discarded by the yang, for without the whole of both halves, consciousness in itself becomes unbalanced. Thereby all forms of life, organic and energy, become unbalanced. When man forgets God, or its spiritual origin, it sacrifices itself and all its works to the fire. Logic and the mind is inconsistent to govern constant life. And when humanity plays God, they will create hell on earth. And that's what's fascinating that I've learned over time. Not everybody is going to have this kind of cognitive subjective perception, but because my spirit or my soul, like my internal consciousness that has embodied this life, is almost identical to who I am now, except for the only difference is Mercury, which is my logic and my mind. It's funny, when I was at younger ages and from the get-go, before I even understood things or whatever like that, or was introduced to some concepts or ideas or whatever, when the first time that I had been exposed to something, I already had a very, very stern, extreme opinion or conclusion of what it was. I know that that's ignorance in general, and that's kind of what I, conditioned myself to look at it and treat it as, because most of the time, for most people, that insinuates that they're just having some sort of bias of some subliminal, external, persuasive narrative to sway their perspective. But actually, what that is because I have the same temperament, I have the same emotional complex, I have the same long-term memory, I have the same, as Mercury is supposed to be your cognition and you absorbing information, Jupiter is supposed to be the higher vibration or the result of that. So the wisdom or knowledge acquired, or the conclusive, wisdom acquired, more or less, is what transcends from that. So I still have the remnants of the forgotten wisdom acquired, or the emotional because I have a water Mercury, and so the emotional attachments or the emotional stigmas that are somehow resonating with things that I used to know that I just can't remember. I can't basically retrieve into short-term memory and recollect it, quote unquote, because I have a different Mercury than my soul does. What's funny, as I reflect back at some things I was avid against, or things that I was like, that's just not right, or that just doesn't make any sense. Nope, I don't care what anybody says. Everybody can prove thoroughly out that nope, I just can't. That specifically, as I go through, the logical steps and researching things, and actually, basically debunking or whatever, or dissecting things and understanding the true origin of it, and uncovering the actual occult, forbidden secrets or hidden knowledge that's being suppressed, that is directly either attributed to that or related to that. I've realized that in the end, when I actually, reveal all the actual information in the context therein, I revert back to the same, conclusions or gut feelings as I did originally, before I even knew what the things were, before I knew what the subjects were. And funny enough, despite my interest in psychology, despite, me just having, an inherited, natural gift at it, I've always resented and had problems with this, psychology fields in general, with the whole essence of it, the doctors and everything. They just bothered me. I've always, I'm just I can't trust you. Why should I listen to you? What the fuck do you know? That was always my mentality, and I was always and religion's horrible, and people who conspire or conform to religion and try to pressure other people are also just part of the problem. And that was how I used to think when I was young too. I remember my soul specifically, who I thought was a paranormal entity in my house when I was young. The only thing that I remember being thoroughly reiterated to me is that I equated religion to suicide. I didn't know if that meant that religion led to suicide, or religion is suicide, or that religion is as bad as suicide, or it's committing suicide. I'm not entirely sure. But they were one and the same. That's all I recall. And that's exactly what it is. Because conforming to some sort of generalized rule ideas, or actually delegating or fixating on there being some sort of, noble person who's the Pope or a prophet or a pastor, that then basically taints or puts his own, subjective, ignorance onto things, and also with or without actually consciously trying to or knowing it, integrates his own, bias and subjectivity of his narrow, experiences of consciousness into the actual altruistic principles and useful, ness of actual, natural law principles, which are the core origin of all scriptures and religious dogma. The personifications were just to help people remember them. So it's like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We don't sit there and actually go hunt down Sally to do a math equation. But that's how everybody treats religion today. People try to go hunt down and actually prove the actual existence of Sally or Jesus, when that wasn't the fucking point at all. And that stems back to my Neptune and Pisces rant about how the Neptune and Pisces age, the polarity symptoms of that would manifest as people being fixated and only honing in or accepting or embracing physiological characteristics, evidence, or physiological validation, material validation. That altruistic meaning, internal validation, or philosophical, actual expanding concepts, that sort of thing, like the personifications that were happening back in ancient Greece of all these, mythologies and stuff like that. That's completely absent today, along with knowledge, along with choice. And I do think that the continuation of perpetuating, fixating on physical, actual material things is just a ploy to distract the masses more and more so. But, what else do I have written here? Psychosis, depression, anxiety, cognitive distortion, and wrath. All these conditions are known to the general population. Many people experience one of these conditions, perhaps, every now and then or regularly, and it's growing worse in severity. It's interesting that the condition is known. Major symptoms are also usually, general knowledge. Yet there's not much of a consensus on the origin of where these problems come from. Where does the origin of your anxiety come from if you have anxiety? And then people say, well, stress and things. And it's like, well, it depends on different spectrum of anxiety. So if you have OCD and you flick switches, where does that come from? If you, basically have avoidant personality disorder and you have social anxiety, where does that come from? And if you just have, PTSD, where does that come from? Or if you just have random, psychotic anxiety breakdowns, or you're paranoid, where does that come from? Right. So the same kind of concept with depression. Where does depression come from? Grief is supposed to be, a process of accepting and coping, but it's supposed to be a short-term duration. If it's a reoccurring phenomenon, or if it's a prolonged thing that's actually debilitating your day-to-day functions and productivity, then it's actually not grief, it's full-blown depression. So what are the actual causes of depression? They need to be explored. People don't actually talk about that. Again, because if we were to address or to highlight the origin of the problem, the virus or the strain of the virus is always the antivirus, meaning that the examining and dissecting or basically taking the dysfunctional part and making it functional, repairing it or replacing it, or removing it from the situation, which would be the virus or the condition in this case, will result in there being a cure, or result in the actual dysfunction no longer being present, making the overall dysfunction functional, thereby curing it. So you notice that we don't talk about the origin of those things. And then anger, and cognitive distortion, etc., where does that all come from? There's a couple of different factors with that. But one common denominator is that our environment plays a huge role in all of it, and I'm going to explain exactly why. So it's still interesting that the consensus on the origin of such problems is unknown to everyone. In recent years, the collaboration of neuropathology, or neurological science, and behavioral theories has narrowed down the cause to two possible factors: internal and external. Pretty simple. So internal is biological, and external is sensory perception or environmental, sensory adaptation or whatever. So one conclusion is certain: environmental factors shape human life. Evidently so. Development, its progression, and mortality. And morality too, but mortality. Due to the influences of organic substances from the air we breathe to the food we eat, the perception of our worldview is not a separate factor, but a causality of biological of the biological. There we go. Did I randomly go on a tangent somewhere else? No. As science and nutrition have demonstrated, nutrition or lack thereof has substantial effects on the brain and organ functions, which directly impact cognitive capacities and mental health overall. The chronic carelessness and general ignorance of modern society has created a mental health crisis, which continues to worsen with prolonged neglect, blatant disregard for those facts, thoroughly documented and published in science and medical journals. So, yet again, despite the fact if you want to look at depression as an external force, there's environmental things that are inducing or conditioning, a depressive state, a hopelessness kind of state, or if you want to look at it from a hormonal kind of biological thing, because depression can, if it's just a continuous thing that just pops up every now and then, I guarantee you if you actually tracked and logged the dates and times of when those are, that not only can you probably correlate those with definitely not just seasons, because there's always the seasonal depression thing, but primarily that is because of a lack of sunlight. Sunlight provides vitamin D. Vitamin D is a nutrient, and therefore basically a lack of nutrition on your part, and it triggers depression. The same kind of concept works when there is a lack of actual macros and micros and nutrients in food. So the more we get to food imitations and the less actual sustenance we have, the more chronic mental conditions, mental adversities, and dysfunctions, disorders, and diseases will transpire. And that's specifically to somebody who has chronic depression all the time, or manic depression, despite the fact that they probably have a water and a fire, really polarizing balance in their astrology chart. Astrology aside, primarily depression is a hormonal thing. So hormones are within you. You get actual hormones, or you can have certain herbs in your diet that are tonics. They're supposed to help promote hormone, creation and overall function, and that gives you energy and all that jazz. So if you have depression and it just periodically pops up, and it's not caused by environmental factors and or some sort of person who's dwelling in every Mercury retrograde or something like that, or every Pluto retrograde, they start to dwell and basically reminisce on horrible things that they won't resolve. That's them that needs to resolve that internally, unless they're just happy with continually to have spouts of depression. Then that's their own choice. That's the whole knowledge and choice. And if you're aware of it and you choose to live that way, then Godspeed, I guess. But that's the one thing that again isn't talked about. It's not even grazed on the surface, the origin of things, because that's how you resolve problems. And this all conclusive rambling and writing came from primarily my frustrations and experience the other day in my personal life, because I help my family actually was the one that pursued it and is a therapeutic foster home. I vicariously live here, and just because of me having so much hostility and chaos within myself, and me being so extreme and stuff, and being a Plutonian naturally as well, with a parental dynamic that's quote unquote the equivalent of a trauma signature in astrology, I can relate to the foster kids that I have in my home that come from really abusive or really hazardous environments, regardless if the parents consciously chose to put them in those, or if it was just circumstances just were unfortunate. And I myself have not only been praised and got foster parent of the year quite a few years ago because of some of my actual tactics, more or less helping some of the kids that have really extreme behavioral issues and actually having some progress with them. And not only that, but I've had numerous kids, come and go, and the older ones, the ones that are, almost 18 or past 18, they're not supposed to by state regulations or whatever, which I don't understand how that works if they're 18, but they come back and find me on social media, or, have my cell phone number from a long time ago and text me and say, hey sis, like I miss you, or how are you doing, and stuff like that. Or even the ones that I've had the most conflict or, retaliation or defiance with, come back and say, I know you were an ass and everything, and you totally cramped my style and what I wanted to do and stuff, and called me out on shit, but you were the most understanding and relaxed, comfortable home I'd been in. You actually helped me with this, and told me some things that, even though I wasn't ready to hear, were actually really, really important for me to know. And I even, right now at this moment, have a kid that used to be in my home and then was removed because he continued to just be defiant. And he's continuously a runaway, and apparently he randomly showed up at my door yesterday, and he's like, hey, what's up? And he just came in, my mom let him in or whatever, and I'm like, what are you doing here, dude? And it's like, oh, I'm a runaway, and it's like, and he always runs to my house, so I'm a foster parent, and I'm a foster home, and he's running away from the foster system or his foster placement. But most kids, and I've had runaways before, most kids will run somewhere else, to a friend's house, to a park, or whatever else. But no, some of them, and this one in particular, continually runs back here. And yeah, he just we called him up, and the disregard for the state in general, he called them up and told them where he was, because I've told my mother before that, yeah, even though we're a foster home and we're allowed to have these kids over here, if he's missing, you need to tell them, and you also need to reiterate that this is not something that you're condoning, that random kids can just run to whatever house they want to, regardless if it's a foster home or not. And I don't want to get in trouble, quote unquote, for that, because if technically liability, and that's what the state's all about too, if he were to get hurt here and he goes to the hospital, there's going to be an investigation, and they're going to try to figure out who was at fault or negligent for that. And if they find out that he was in this home and they weren't even notified that he was here, yeah. So I'm like, hello, communication. So he contacts them, and they say, oh, okay, no big deal. So usually the protocol is that the foster home in question calls the police, they do a runaway report, and the police have to come and get them, and then take them back to the home or take them to, juvenile, detainment. But they just were like, okay, just let him stay there, and he's still here. That was 2 days ago. And I'm just the blatant disregard for stuff. I'm just wow, volumes. And then when I went to a parent-teacher conference or whatever, just because of my thorough knowledge with, I obviously am not an advocate for, condemning people with, mental disorders or cognitive disorders, but because I prefer to instead of dehumanize people, use the actual terminology that's in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual to explain behavior. I was randomly explaining to some of the teachers that, yeah, I asked his doctor if he's ADD-ish, because primarily his doctor was asking how he's doing in school. And yeah, the social worker that in question that came over and talked to me later, when I told her the context of, yeah, he's not ADD or anything, he just has problems organizing information. She looked at me like this and said, that is a violation of privacy. And I'm like, what? And it's talking and disclosing things that were talked about with the doctor. And it's and he's not ADD. And I'm like, I never fucking said that. I said, obviously ADD is a disorder or a deficit of being able to pay attention to shit. The kid is scattered, and it's because he's curious and whatever else. And he's a Sagittarius. So he's likely has Sagittarius Mercury, which means that he's mentally scattered and fades in and out and is too involved in whatever he's concluding in his head as opposed to actually paying attention to people. And if people knew astrology, knew that context more, and if she actually listened to what I fucking said, I didn't violate any privacy, I didn't insinuate that he had ADD. As a matter of fact, I said, well, I asked his doctor, and he doesn't say he had ADD or anything. Then she emphasized that I'm violating his health privacy, and I'm like, I wasn't going any further into, except for when the doctor asked how he's doing in school. that is directly related to his teacher and how he's doing in school. So it's, and again, it wasn't disclosing any, diagnosis. It wasn't disclosing any, things. It wasn't even anything. And then she says he's not also not ADD, and I'm like, right. So why are you getting upset? Like, you're getting upset about something that was said that's not even, clinically, documented, that I never actually said. She's just so fixated on the actual laws and rules that she didn't care to acknowledge that the whole conversation that was going on with me and the teacher and the doctor is he doing good in school, and is he able to focus, and can he fucking learn? That part of the conversation was completely fucking gone from this person. Yeah. That's what drives me insane. And then, like, quite a few years back, what I got foster parent of the year for was that I don't have, like, actual, cameras or whatever, or security cameras that record anything, because that would insinuate that I actually want to blow money on that. But they're just like those two-way webcam things that, have a sensor thing that hooks up to an app on a tablet or whatever, or a mobile device, where it just tells me, like, basically I can jump on it when it beeps, and it's actually got a speaker on it so I can talk through it. And when I had older kids who either had, compulsive eating issues, or stealing things, or making messes and then blaming each other for it, I put one of those in the kitchen. And we have the windows wide open too, no curtains, no anything. So I mean, hello, my neighbor across the street that has no life will sit there and go, oh, hey, I thought you got a new kid. No, that was your boyfriend. I'm like, wow, you pay attention way too much. So I mean, the whole world can see. So that camera was primarily put in there. And funny enough, the chronic behavior of stealing, trashing things, or whatever, or basically hoarding food, which is unhealthy for said whatever, was being curbed, because when I would randomly hear the beeping go off on my tablet, I wouldn't watch it all the time, and it wasn't recording, but I'd hear the beep go off, and I'm up here just bullshitting or working on stuff, and I don't want to sit in the kitchen all day, and then I turn it on, and I see, said kid sneaking in and getting this and getting that, or like getting a bowl of cereal, and then he gets like 2 or 3 more bowls, and stuff like that, and then I just jump on the intercom and say, hey, I see that, and then he goes, sorry, and he walked away and stopped. And they had no idea when I would be watching or not. And then after a while, like after about a month or so of that, they actually started policing each other and said, watch, Ashley's going to find out. She's going to find out. You better do those dishes. And it's like, I don't have to deal with this whole, you told me, she told you to do that, or you told me to do that. You know what you're supposed to do, and she can see you. It actually started to condition them to think before they act, or to actually, brainstorm out the possible consequences of what will transpire if I actually am looking or not. And that was the most substantial progress I've made with any of the extreme behavioral cases, with some of the kids I had. That kid that was pissed that he kept getting caught decided to take it up with, the highest part of the state social workers, not the ones that I work with locally, and said that I was violating his privacy and recording him. It was investigated. They correlated with some sort of other case in like Ohio or something like that, where there was actual cameras being put in the bathrooms and the bedrooms, and there was actual quote unquote documented footage that could be categorized as child pornography. And they said that basically I'm violating their personal like space and privacy. I'm like, no, I'm not. Everybody and their mom and literally my neighbor can see them. I was like, and it's not recording anything. It's just a straight two-way thing. And the behavior overall, not just at home, but in school, and their social skills, and even when the social workers would come by, noticed such a drastic difference. And it wasn't due to medicating them. And that's why I got foster parent of the year for that. But because the state came down and cracked down on that, they don't care that I actually made progress with their development. They don't care that I actually was, creating an environment for cognitive therapy to actually help correct what would be conduct defiant disorder kind of behavior. I'm not revealing any personal stuff, but behavior, characteristics. Yeah, defiance, that sort of thing. Those things cannot be corrected with medication, except for just putting them on antipsychotics and making them zombies. Then they just don't move. Then you have to do everything for them. Like, you either make them immobile or, they're a hot mess. The only way to contain that hot mess is to continue to condition them and put them in parameters where they have actual consequences and rules and restrictions to basically yeah, abide by. They didn't care about that. And I get lectured still, even if I, make it known that any of the other kids are contacting me. They don't care that I actually made that kid's life better. I've had numerous kids ask me if I would, beg me if I would adopt them. I have no interest in having kids. Yeah. And why should I even bother to have kids when there's plenty of other kids that my generation continues to pump out that need fucking help? Yeah. And what kills me the most is that social worker that came over here. I recognized her. It's the first time I'd met her. She's like the higher up of my immediate social worker that works with my kids. I went to high school with her. And from I can't remember exactly who she is, but I don't remember having any pleasant interactions or knowledge of her. And that was just reiterated yet again. And I'm just like, wow. And so another thing that kills me is that I've already kind of run on a rant before multiple times about the counselors not actually helping them. It's continuing to perpetuate, the chronic need for the state. Because if we actually cured all the kids, and if I helped all the kids, and all the problems were resolved, all these special aides and social workers wouldn't have a job, and they get paid well. But the actual counselor that's in my area, he's the ex-sheriff, and he's angry and intense. Like, I usually have a pretty good interaction or dialogue with cops, despite the fact that, the majority of people usually don't. I give off that vibe that I'm just like, yeah, I'm restrained, you don't have to worry about me, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just cool. I give off cop mentality. When I was just in the presence of this individual before he tore my head off, he just made me very uncomfortable. I was walking on eggshells. Wow. I was like, wow. I don't even want to be standing in the same room with you, and I'm not an empath, so I'm like, wow. And I'm just like, holy cow. So, the kid that he's quote unquote talking to every week refuses to talk to him. The school counselors, just because of, timeout steps or whatever, that would talk to him, have gotten further with getting him to open up and actually, vent, than the guy who's been continually seeing him for months and months. And I'm just like, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to tell that guy fucking anything. Yeah. And again, that particular counselor got in trouble because his entire office, instead of being full of books or whatever else, is full of board games. And apparently they play board games. And I remember the first time that he went, I went and picked him up, and the kid had like a printed out piece of paper from a picture, and it was of Google Earth looking at, some place the kid used to live. And I'm like, was that really? I'm like, well, okay, well, I guess if that's part of, venting and talking about therapy, then whatever. But no, it's because he just continues to bullshit and tries to waste 45 minutes. It's not even an hour, 45 minutes to make money off of this. And I'm just like, dude. And I'm just like, wow. Yeah. And I already know, the negligence and the intentional, neglect on the medical, side of the spectrum, modern medicine, primarily because my family members, my immediate family in the area, has been working at this hospital, which is the number 2 employer in my area, for a decade or more. And then some of my other relatives still work there. They all have chronic health conditions, and their health is terrible. They are literally at a hospital for 80% of their day. And they have full insurance, all coverage, and they're still rotting and dying away. While I sit here and choose to not have insurance and take care of myself, and I do better. And then even Boo being type 1 diabetic, and numerous times he was having, blood sugar issues or whatever, essentially stemmed from him trying to do some sort of, conserving on his insulin stuff, and type 1 diabetics don't fucking do that. He learned that the hard way, evidently so. and that did send him into diabetic ketoacidosis, and he did that almost 3 times now, and it took 2 fucking times for him to be in the ICU and almost die. For them to convey to me that if type 1 diabetics either, are purging liquids out their end or out their front for more than a couple hours and they don't actually replace or replenish those, that they immediately need to come in and have their fluids done, and that's why he almost died the 3rd time. Yeah. And that's common knowledge, I guess. And the only reason why I learned that is because the nurse that was in the ICU, I was so worried. I'm like, please tell me, like, what we can do, because this is, like, the 3rd time being here. She said, well, let me go print out everything on type 1 diabetes in our our information reference log, and I'll give it to you. And I'm like, okay. And I read through it. And I said, wow, what about this? And she's like, oh, yeah, that's a thing. Oh, yeah, that's a thing? So from personal experience, I've seen the truth and the fucking disgusting reality of the modern medical health industry, the perpetuated lies and the legislation restrictions to continue to make us sick, and the intentional neglect of child development, sabotaging any actual, therapeutic work progress. And it also irritates me and bothers me, specifically about that one social worker, because she looked down and talked down to me as if I did something wrong, when in all actuality, at the end of all of that was concluded, was that I discovered that there's behavioral issues going on at school. I discovered that the teachers are actually very concerned, and that the principal and the teachers have all been aware of concerns. And for some reason, they have yet to vocalize this to, my mother, the guardian, or the social workers. And they said, why haven't they told us this? Maybe it's because in the same context of when people are telling me things, I sit there and go, oh, okay, I get you. I actually am actively listening. I don't instantly jump to, no, I don't think that's right, like they all do. And that's why they felt comfortable talking to me. And I have a history, and I'm well aware that people feel comfortable opening up to me. Primarily because I'm a weirdo, I don't judge, and I understand that people don't always articulate themselves, and I want them to get it out. I let them talk. I actually listen. I'm not listening to hear the cue of how I'm going to react or respond or criticize what they say. I'm legitimately listening to it. And I'm aware. And I'm observant. Yeah. That's why they told me more. And so, at the end of all that, they were mad at the teachers, and they were chastising me for the way that I quote-unquote handled it or decided to discuss dialogue with the teachers. But fascinatingly enough, the quote-unquote questionable tactics or dialogue that I had with the teachers led to me actually stumbling upon information that nobody else was aware of. That if caught soon enough, can be rectified and, conditioned and helped with whatever is going on. And then I said, and if he had another counselor, just anybody else, as like a psychologist, like a psychiatrist, and especially when she kept reiterating that he's not ADD and he hasn't been diagnosed with ADD, I'm like, well, who does that? I was like, well, not his primary care doctor, an actual mental professional. I'm like, great, not the counselor he's seeing. Having a bachelor's in criminal in criminal forensics and then going into the police academy does not constitute you to be able to, clinically diagnose people and prescribe psychiatric meds. I'm not like I'm promoting or insinuating that, but the same person that would quote unquote be responsible for, recommending medication would be the person that actually knows psychology, which is what's actually necessary. But they have no intentions of actually helping people, curing them, making kids well. Because if they grow and support a strong, independent generation, then they won't be submissive, obedient slaves. Yeah. And if they continue to enable and exaggerate or perpetuate chaos, chaotic behavior, and unstable behavior, it gives them justification to restrict people's freedoms and freedom of choice and to further regulate things. Yeah. It's like letting the child, like the crazy, hyperactive child, run loose in a store full of glass. And then, the kid knocks shit over. And then, they decide to do that primarily because they want to, basically exclude all people at certain ages or kids or whatever from coming in that store. No, just, don't let the kid loose. Tell people to watch their kids. Don't do that. Don't do that. It just... They're not actual cures. The only cure, the only solution to anything is knowledge and acceptance and the choice to act on those. Too eager to appease, the cure is the disease, and it's only growing worse. The end.